4 terrifying and dangerous islands on Earth that humans are forbidden to approach. Do you believe that there are still islands on Earth where just one wrong step could put a person in a life-threatening situation? Can you believe that there are places where thousands of venomous snakes rule an entire island? Places that were once used to test biological weapons? And even an island that modern humans are almost forbidden from setting foot on? And the most frightening part is that behind these locations are still stories that have never been completely solved, making us even more curious the deeper we dig. Hello, and welcome to Discovery Fact. Today, we're embarking on a special journey to explore 4 of the most terrifying and dangerous islands on the planet. Some may look like nothing more than tropical paradises from a distance, yet hide deadly creatures within. Others bear the traces of secret experiments that once alarmed the entire world. And in some places, the danger doesn't come from nature at all, but from history and human actions themselves. So, what is truly hiding behind these seemingly peaceful patches of land in the middle of the ocean? Let's explore them together with Discovery Fact right now. Death Island, where thousands of venomous snakes rule a tropical paradise. Try to imagine yourself drifting across the ocean. Ahead of you is a lush green island with cliffs covered in vegetation, clear blue skies, and the endless sea stretching all the way to the horizon. Looking at such a beautiful scene, the first thing that might come to mind is, if only I could set foot on that island and spend a few days there. Wouldn't that be amazing? But what if the boat captain suddenly turned to you and said, "Don't go ashore. There could be thousands of venomous snakes crawling right beneath your feet." Would you still want to step onto the island? Well, this is exactly the feeling that Ilha de Queimada Grande, also known by a name that is enough to make your skin crawl, Snake Island, can evoke. The island lies off the southeastern coast of Brazil, about 22 miles from the mainland, and covers approximately 4.6 million square feet. From a distance, Queimada Grande doesn't look dangerous at all. The island is covered in lush vegetation, has a humid tropical climate, and features a coastline lined with striking rocky cliffs. Yet beneath this peaceful appearance lies one of the most unusual populations of venomous snakes in the world. This is the home of Bothrops insularis, an endemic pit viper that can be found almost nowhere else outside this island. The frightening part is that Queimada Grande became isolated from the mainland thousands of years ago when sea levels rose, turning this piece of land into an isolated island. The snakes trapped on the island could no longer return to the mainland and were forced to adapt to a completely different food supply. Over time, this isolation led to a unique evolutionary process, causing the island's snake population to develop along its own path. They primarily prey on migratory birds and other small animals that appear on the island. This isolated environment has made the Queimada Grande pit viper one of the most famous venomous snakes in Brazil. There are old stories claiming that pirates once released snakes onto the island to protect buried treasure hidden somewhere on the island. Sounds like something straight out of an adventure movie, right? But to this day, there is no reliable evidence proving that the pirate and treasure story is true. The more widely accepted scientific explanation for the presence of this endemic snake is the rise in sea levels and the evolutionary process that followed the island's isolation. However, that doesn't make the island any less frightening. If anything, it makes Queimada Grande an incredibly unique natural laboratory. Some older estimates once suggested that the island could have had an extremely high density of snakes. At one point, people even repeated the claim that there was roughly 1 snake per 10.8 square feet. But figures like these are often exaggerated and do not accurately represent how snakes are actually distributed across the entire island. What we do know for certain is that the snake population here is significant enough for the Brazilian authorities to strictly control human access to the island. And the reason isn't simply the number of snakes. It's also the potency of their venom. The venom of Bothrops insularis can cause severe tissue damage and affect the circulatory system, turning a bite into a medical emergency. Now, try putting yourself in that situation. You're on an island more than 20 miles from the mainland. There's no hospital nearby, no ambulance waiting for you. If you happen to be bitten by a snake, the most frightening thing isn't just the venom. It's the distance between you and the medical care you need. That factor alone could turn what might seem like a minor accident into a race against time, couldn't it? Because of this level of danger, access to Ilha de Queimada Grande is strictly restricted and is primarily reserved for authorized activities such as scientific research or infrastructure maintenance. Other stories claim that people who once lived and worked at the island's lighthouse met tragic ends because of snakes. However, these stories are not always supported by sufficiently reliable historical documentation. So, if we want to tell this story accurately, it's important to clearly distinguish between legend and fact. And the facts are frightening enough. Just think about it. A place with stunning tropical scenery, surrounded by the ocean, with no resorts, no freely roaming tourists, and almost no permanent human presence. Yet it is one of those places where you simply cannot step off a boat whenever you want. That is the paradox of Snake Island. The farther away you look at it, the more it resembles paradise. But the deeper you investigate, the more you realize that nature has created an entirely different world here. But if you're thinking that snakes are the most terrifying thing an island could possibly contain, don't jump to conclusions just yet, because at our next destination, the danger isn't hiding in the bushes beneath your feet. It may be silently lurking beneath the murky waters of a swamp, waiting for its prey to come close enough. Let's leave Brazil behind and head to Myanmar, where an island once became the scene of one of the most horrifying stories involving saltwater crocodiles in the history of warfare. And that island is Ram Ri, the crocodile island that challenges the world's bravest. Leaving the waters of Brazil behind, we continue our journey to the other side of the world, where a vast island lies off the coast of Rakhine State in Myanmar. This is Ram Ri, an island covering approximately 521 square miles, with tropical forests, vast wetlands, and a complex network of rivers and waterways. From above, Ram Ri may look like an ordinary tropical landscape, or even a rather beautiful one. But once you venture deeper into the wetlands, everything changes. This is the habitat of the saltwater crocodile, one of the largest reptiles on Earth. A fully grown individual can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh hundreds of kilograms, with exceptionally large specimens growing far beyond that. What makes these predators especially frightening is that saltwater crocodiles don't need to constantly chase their prey like predators on land. They can lie motionless beneath the water, exposing only part of their heads, blending almost perfectly into their surroundings, and patiently waiting. When prey gets close enough, they can suddenly launch themselves forward with astonishing speed. And if you're standing in murky water where you can't see what lies beneath the surface, there's hardly a more unsettling feeling than knowing a massive crocodile could be lurking somewhere nearby. But the reason Ram Ri became famous around the world isn't just because of its crocodiles. During World War I, the island became the site of a brutal battle between British and Japanese forces. In 1945, Japanese troops held their positions on the island before eventually being pushed by British forces toward the surrounding wetlands. It was here that the infamous story emerged that hundreds of Japanese soldiers supposedly died after entering the swamps, with saltwater crocodiles allegedly attacking and killing many of them. The story quickly became one of the most terrifying wartime legends of the 20th century. It was even associated with Guinness World Records in connection with the number of deaths attributed to animal attacks. However, if we want to examine the story from a serious historical perspective, one important point needs to be made clear. The number of soldiers supposedly eaten by crocodiles has been questioned by numerous researchers. Historical records indicate that the Battle of Ram Ri Island did result in heavy Japanese casualties, but determining exactly how many soldiers died because of crocodile attacks is nearly impossible. Some later research has suggested that the story may have been exaggerated as it was repeated and passed through different sources over time. However, that does not mean the crocodiles of Ram Ri are harmless. Quite the opposite. Saltwater crocodiles are genuinely dangerous predators, and there have been numerous documented cases of attacks on humans in other parts of their natural range. So, the most frightening thing about Ram Ri may not necessarily be a horrifying story from the past, but the harsh natural environment that exists there today. Imagine yourself walking through a vast wetland. Low bushes and dense mangrove forests surround you on both sides. The water beneath your feet is cloudy, while the soft mud makes every step difficult. Above you, the tropical heat is intense, and around you, there are almost no elevated places from which you can see the entire area. You don't know what is beneath the water. You don't know whether a crocodile is lying motionless just a few dozen yards away. A single unusual movement beneath the surface could be enough to make you turn around and look. And that is what makes a swamp so terrifying. The predator may see you before you ever see it. Beyond crocodiles, tropical environments like Ram Ri can contain many other hazards, from insects and venomous snakes to infectious diseases common in tropical regions. When all of these factors combine with swampy terrain and harsh weather conditions, Ram Ree is certainly not a place for spontaneous adventures. But what's fascinating is that nature here isn't deliberately trying to be frightening. Crocodiles don't hunt humans because they hate people. They are simply doing what they have done for millions of years, searching for food and defending their territory. It is humans who become the outsiders when we enter their environment. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Ram Ree has to offer. When we step into the wilderness, we are not always at the top of the food chain. Sometimes, we are simply visitors who can be spotted far more easily than we realize. But if Ram Ree frightens you because of what might be hiding beneath the water, the next island is terrifying in an entirely different way. There, you could stand on a beautiful green field, breathe in the fresh air, and believe you were somewhere in the peaceful countryside of Scotland. Yet beneath that seemingly harmless ground once existed a danger so serious that authorities had to seal off the entire island for decades. And the most frightening part is that the enemy had no visible form that you could see with the naked eye. That island is Gruinard, the paradise island that was once turned into a dead zone. From a distance, Gruinard is probably one of the last islands that would make you think of the word dangerous dot located off the northwest coast of Scotland. This small island is covered with green, grassy slopes, low hills, and a pristine, peaceful coastline, creating the feeling that time itself has simply forgotten this place. There are no skyscrapers, no heavy traffic, and no luxury resorts crowded along the shore. There is only vast, untouched nature and the sound of the wind moving across the grasslands. If someone were to put Gruinard up for sale one day at an unbelievably cheap price, you might think you had just found the bargain of the century. But hold on before you reach for your wallet, because this island has a very unusual history, and it is the reason people were forced to stay away from it for decades. The story began during World War, when the war was not only being fought on battlefields, but was also entering secret laboratories. Amid fears that Nazi Germany might use biological weapons, the British government selected Gruinard as a site for testing anthrax, a serious disease caused by the bacterium Bacillus anthracis. This isolated island was considered a convenient location for conducting the experiments because it was far from populated areas and relatively easy to control. Scientists brought sheep onto the island and conducted experiments designed to assess the disease-causing potential of the bacteria. It may sound like a story from a distant past, but the consequences of those experiments lasted far longer than the war itself. Anthrax was particularly concerning because Bacillus anthracis can form spores capable of surviving in the environment for long periods. Once these spores were released into the soil, they did not simply disappear after a few days or months. That is precisely what turned Gruinard into a major problem after the experiments ended. The island was abandoned and left unused for a long time. People living nearby knew about Gruinard's past, but setting foot on the island became something almost no one wanted to risk. The frightening part was that you could not see the pathogen with the naked eye. There was no snake crawling out in front of you to warn you, no roar from a predator, no obvious sign telling you that the ground beneath your feet might once have been contaminated. All you could see was an ordinary green landscape, while the potential danger could be lying right beneath the soil under your feet. Because of this risk, Gruinard was once considered one of the most seriously biologically contaminated locations in the United Kingdom. For many years, the island was effectively isolated. The British government eventually launched large-scale decontamination programs, including the use of formaldehyde to treat the soil in areas believed to have been contaminated. The process was far from simple. Imagine having to clean an entire island where the thing you need to eliminate isn't garbage or an oil spill, but bacterial spores capable of surviving in the environment for extremely long periods. It was a challenge that required scientists to proceed with extraordinary caution. By the end of the 20th century, after years of treatment and evaluation, British authorities declared that Gruinard had been decontaminated to a level considered sufficient for restrictions to be lifted. Sheep were brought onto the island to test the environment, and authorities subsequently confirmed that the island was no longer considered the same kind of hazard it had once been. In 1990, the British government lifted the special restrictions on Gruinard, marking an important turning point in the island's history. But notice something fascinating. Even though the island had officially been treated and was no longer under the same restrictions as before, the name Gruinard still makes many people uneasy. And that shows us the strange power of memory. An island can be cleaned with chemicals, examined through science, and declared safe. But its history can still remain deeply embedded in the human mind. Today, Gruinard is no longer a dead island in the way old stories often portrayed it. However, its past remains a powerful reminder that biological experiments conducted during wartime can leave consequences that extend far beyond the moment when they take place. So, if you were given the chance, would you be brave enough to set foot on this island? Let me know in the comments below. Now, we're continuing our journey to an island where the danger does not come from animals, volcanoes, or deadly pathogens in the soil. Instead, the danger lies in the people who live on the island and their desire to protect their isolated way of life from the outside world. One of the most mysterious and controversial islands in the Indian Ocean is North Sentinel, the island the modern world is not allowed to set foot on. If you look at North Sentinel from above, you probably wouldn't see anything particularly unusual. It is a vast stretch of green in the middle of the Indian Ocean, covered by dense tropical forests, surrounded by clear blue waters and coral reefs stretching along the coastline. The island covers approximately 23 square miles and is part of the Andaman Islands, which are administered by India. There are no crowded cities, no highways, no hotels, and no oceanfront resorts like those found on many other islands. But it is precisely the absence of the modern world that makes North Sentinel one of the most mysterious places on Earth. Because here, an indigenous community has lived largely isolated from the outside world for an extremely long time, and they have made it clear that they do not want outsiders entering their territory. They are known as the Sentinelese, one of the most isolated indigenous communities still living on Earth. The Sentinelese primarily survive through hunting, gathering, and making use of the natural resources available on the island. They use bows and arrows, spears, and metal tools that they collect or repurpose from objects that wash ashore. What makes them particularly fascinating is that their language is almost impossible for outsiders to understand. There has not been enough sustained contact for researchers to determine the Sentinelese language's precise relationship with other languages. And this is also why North Sentinel has become one of those places we know very little about, yet are incredibly curious about. Outsiders have attempted to approach the island many times throughout history, but these encounters have rarely gone smoothly. The Sentinelese have repeatedly made it very clear that they do not want strangers entering their territory. From the shore, they have used bows and arrows to warn approaching boats. In some cases, they have even fired arrows toward low-flying helicopters over the island. This has led some outsiders to call North Sentinel the island of no return. But that description isn't entirely accurate. It is not true that anyone who sets foot on the island is guaranteed to die. The more important issue is that the risk of conflict and the risk of introducing infectious diseases to the indigenous community is extremely serious. The Sentinelese have lived largely isolated from the outside world for a very long time. As a result, they may lack immunity to many common diseases that modern people generally consider ordinary. A disease that seems relatively mild to us could have devastating consequences for a small and isolated community. For this reason, the Indian government has adopted a very specific policy, not attempting to forcibly integrate the Sentinelese into the outside world. Access to the island is prohibited, and authorities regularly patrol the surrounding waters to prevent outsiders from getting too close. It is one of the rare cases where non-contact is considered the best form of protection. History has recorded several encounters between outsiders and the island's inhabitants. In 1867, the merchant ship Nineveh ran aground near North Sentinel. The survivors of the shipwreck had to face the vigilance of the island's inhabitants before eventually being rescued. Several decades later, other encounters continued to occur. One of the best-known incidents happened in 2006, when two Indian fishermen accidentally drifted too close to the island and were killed after encountering the Sentinelese. When authorities attempted to approach the area by helicopter, the islanders continued using bows and arrows to warn them away. Images of people standing on the beach with their bows raised toward helicopters have long been among the most recognizable images associated with North Sentinel, but behind those images lies a much more complicated story. We cannot simply label the Sentinelese as a violent tribe, because their actions need to be understood within the context of generations of protecting their territory from outsiders. Throughout history, isolated indigenous communities have faced disease, exploitation, and violence after coming into contact with outside civilizations. Therefore, their strong reaction when strangers enter their territory can be understood as a form of self-defense. And perhaps this is what makes North Sentinel completely different from the three islands we have explored so far. On Snake Island, nature created the danger. On Ramree, the threat comes from the wilderness. On Gruinard, humans created a dangerous environment through biological experiments. But on North Sentinel, the most important thing is respecting the boundaries of a community that does not want contact with the modern world. We may be curious. We may want to know how they live, what language they speak, or what traditions they follow. But curiosity does not give us the right to invade their territory. And perhaps that is precisely why North Sentinel has managed to preserve a part of the mystery that so many other places on Earth have already lost. You see, it's incredible to think that the vast world out there still hides islands that can be this terrifying, isn't it? And it's not just the islands we've explored today. There are many other dangerous islands scattered around the world, each with its own frightening stories and mysteries. So, what other islands do you know of that are just as terrifying? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to give Discovery Fact a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more fascinating discoveries. For now, goodbye, and see you in the next adventure.